moving is medicine. There's something with moving that you don't need to know why or how it relates to your emotions or trauma. And just like trauma rewrites pain, it also is the opposite. When you feel safe, embodied, and in a compassionate relationship, really with yourself, you can rewrite your story for safety. Hey, beautiful soul, and welcome to Dear Body, I'm Listening, the podcast for women navigating chronic symptoms, invisible illness, and that daily dance between hope and exhaustion. If you've ever been told it's all in your head, well, this podcast is for you because your body is not lying and neither are you. Hi, I'm Donna Piper, movement therapist, Pilates instructor, and chronic illness navigator. After years of being dismissed, misdiagnosed, and doing everything quote unquote right, but still getting sicker, I created this space to tell our truth. Here we talk about swelling, brain fog, nervous system crashes, and the kind of symptoms that don't always show up on lab results. We're going to explore lymph, breath, movement, self-trust, latest research, books, relationships, basically everything. All from a place of compassion and honesty. This isn't about fixing your body. It's about finally being heard and getting some answers. Hey, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Dear Body, I'm Listening. Today, we're starting a 4-part series on trauma and pain. This one is close to my heart because it's both my lived story and my professional work. Before I was teaching Pilates, before I was coaching women with chronic illness, and before I was coaching women with their relationship issues, I was a dance movement psychotherapist. My master's thesis focused on PTSD with Vietnam veterans. And I went on to work with trauma patients at Cornell Interventions in Inglewood, Illinois. I even flew to New York City right after 9/11 with a colleague. We spent 10 days at the plaza doing trauma therapy with families and survivors from the terrorist attack on the second tower. That experience just reinforced how trauma is lived also personally and collectively. And it doesn't just live in the mind. It shows up in the body. And that was what my training in dance movement psychotherapy was all about, how the body works. And I did extensive training, education on everything from in utero to living in the body and all the different sort of developmental tasks the body goes through, and also the psychological theories, everything from Freudian to cognitive behavior therapy and everything in between. And it really is the key to help with releasing trauma. You live in your body, your mind, your emotions, and nothing is separate. And I believe that from the beginning. And that's why 25 years ago, I got into this field and I specifically sought out that sort of master's. So it was a 3-year program, including a thesis and a defending of your clinical work. So it just reinforced every time I used it and practiced it that the way people sat, the way they breathed, everything in their movements held a story, told a story, and you didn't have to understand. There didn't have to be a mental understanding and intellectual understanding to release and heal trauma. Sometimes it's even better not to talk about it, is just to move your way through it. Because I knew early on that the body carried the secrets the mind couldn't always speak. But what I didn't know was how much my own body had been carrying. So here's our real talk recap this week, and it's my truth. And here it is. I've been living with pain since I was 7 years old. That's when the migraines started. Imagine being a little girl who just wants to dance, to move, to play with her friends. And instead, some days you were just curled up in the dark, head pounding so hard you felt like you might explode. That was me. I learned to lie perfectly still, have a cold compress on, visualizations. This was the 70s when this started happening, late 70s. And, there wasn't all the information we have now. And there wasn't even medication for migraines, especially for little kids. So I got all the tests to see, if it was cancer or whatever they thought at the time. But it was really migraines. And those migraines trained me early in having big pain tolerance. So when I knew when I couldn't go to school or I couldn't go do something, like the pain was so bad. And, many times I had pushed through the pain, making me vomit, etc. It was awful. I never wished migraine pain on anyone. I also learned to tough it out, to keep going and to push through. And I thought that that was strength and that was my only option, really. If I wanted to continue to be mainly present in my life, sometimes I just had to push through it. If a test landed on a migraine day, I couldn't just skip it. So, same with when I started working. I couldn't just call in all the time because I had a migraine or I didn't think that I could. And I didn't. And I really needed to learn to function within the pain. But that really gave me a very distorted sense of what pain is. And it really started pushed me away from my own body sensations. Because really, this was all about survival. And it was that survival pattern, ignoring what my body was screaming, became my default setting. So years later, when I started to have symptoms that are now classified as POTS, which I always knew that I had. My mother would have it, but it was never really enough where I went to the doctor to tell them my symptoms. Same with hypermobility and EDS. I went to tons of doctors as a kid and an adult, and no one ever correlated those two together. Same with mast cell activation syndrome. I always had a sensitive tummy and I would have reactions to smells and so many different things that would happen. And still, no one that I saw had the knowledge to connect those things. And when my legs started aching or when the weight never really left my legs, even after all the dancing I did, 8-10 hours a day, very clean eating that I always have done since my whole life, my body shape was never that of a typical dancer. And when my legs ached or they had real feelings or they just would get bruised randomly, I just never thought about it. I just ignored it. And then when I would become exhausted after doing some of the smallest things, and when I felt like, oh God, I just don't understand why I'm so crushingly tired, I really just thought that's just how life is. You do a lot and then you crash, and then you do a lot and crash. I didn't question it. I just, like I said, assumed this was normal. This was me. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Hypermobility and joint pain was brushed off. Chronic fatigue, was thought of as, I don't even know if they had it then, but it definitely in my 20s and 30s, I'd heard of it. But, it was really just kind of brushed off as a rule everything out. And I think it still is. Luckily, we just got a study done in Edinburgh that really says that yes, chronic fatigue has a brain issue component where your body still believes it is sick. So it is shutting down your system in order to have you heal, even when the virus isn't present anymore. And the gut pain and the bloating, they were really tied to my MCAS and lipedema inflammation. Constipation that I always had was really dysautonomia and chronic fatigue slowing my motility. And I also had a pattern of strep throat as a child, which is now being linked to Epstein-Barr virus, which is kind of similar, like fibromyalgia, Epstein-Barr, and chronic fatigue aren't the same thing, but they kind of live in the same little space. So who knows? The chronic strep throat could have been driving a lot of these things for me to get in a state where it really feels like I'm not able to function in my life fully. And truly, I'm not able to function fully in my life. And because of the high pain tolerance, because I trained myself not to listen, to push through, I missed the red flags. And I didn't have any, honestly, half of the symptoms that I've just lived with, I never even really knew there were symptoms. That's how part of me they were and they are. So I don't always recognize it even now, oh, that thing is associated with, the hypermobility or I've done too much. So it's really a relearning and a learning and an unlearning of everything that I thought I knew to really make sure that I'm aware that I'm treating all of my illnesses in a way that are going to benefit me and where it's going to be helpful other than hindering. And, all of this is to say that until my body really, really broke, like I gained all this weight in a short amount of time, I couldn't function and everything I did, it just never got better. Anything that I tried to do to help myself felt like it made it worse. I had to face the truth that, there's something I was missing, and I got the answer finally after searching about the medical condition. But I also needed to, and I have been working on listening to the hard truth that my body just wasn't tired. It just wasn't these things that were happening to me. I was also carrying trauma. Trauma from whenever it happened, but trauma of not being listened to, of pushing through, emotional trauma of having to pull back from friends or not feeling like I'm accomplishing enough or failing, especially in my marriage, like, not being able to do the things that I want to do, take care of my house, cook, have these things. So really feeling let down as a partner as well. So all of this has contributed to the trauma. And I have to really figure out like is there a significant traumatic event or a significant distressing event? That's how I've always named trauma in my life and with my patients. It doesn't have to be a big thing that came down. There are people that definitely get abused sexually, physically, emotionally. They've had accidents or they've had something where it's like you could see that, okay, that's a clear trauma. But a significant distressing event is something that your body holds on to and creates trauma. So it creates that sympathetic system activating. And if it never downregulates, so you have a nice regulation between parasympathetic and sympathetic, then your body's living in this traumatic state. And even though I have seen it with my clients, I've seen them change 100%. When I was looking at myself, I thought I was doing things that were self-care. And I worked with my own counselors and my own supervisors, and still things were missed or not gone to the core. And this is where my story takes a twist. Long before I had the words like lipedema, chronic fatigue, EDS, MCAS, POTS in my vocabulary, I went through and got my master's degree in dance movement therapy. Why? Because I knew deep down that the body was holding the secrets to healing. Even in my undergrad, when I took dance as my major, because that's the thing I knew least about, one of my projects was to work with children and the children behavioral services. So basically, they were in a foster care system and they were older and they had some learning and physical issues. So we did a dance program, just simply doing a jazz class and to see how they can express themselves. And the results of that were just positive. That was my own little study of what I wanted to do before I really entered into the world of dance movement therapy. And it's just moving is medicine. There's something with moving that you don't need to know why or how it relates to your emotions or trauma, but really just the fact of moving, even taking a dance class, which unfortunately my go-to, that space has not been where I could go because of the lipedema and the chronic fatigue and the severity of the POTS and the severity of the MCAS and the hypermobility. And, as a child, when I look back, I had already tried to think my way out of my feelings. I was very logical. If anyone's into astrology, I blame that on being Aquarius moon, and I have a lot of Aquarius and Sagittarius in my charts. But I was very smart, analytical, and a problem solver. So I really figured I could think my way out of things. But no matter how much I tried to logic my way out of pain, it never worked. My body was always carrying this truth, and I just either didn't know the signs or for whatever reason, this is my path now. So as I dove into movement psychotherapy and I studied post-traumatic stress disorder and spent years learning how trauma shows up in posture, breath, movement patterns, how it's released with those things as well, not necessarily having to put a story to them, but honoring the space that comes up even with you just breathe. And honestly, I'm very good at it. I'm very good at what I do. And I watched my clients with PTSD reclaim safety, release tension, and rewrite their stories through movement. And it's very powerful. But here's what I didn't do. I didn't apply the same lens to myself fully, or I somehow hid it from myself, hoping that maybe my blind spots would come up with my other practitioners. It didn't happen for me. And even though I looked at my migraines, my fatigue, swelling, gut pain, all of that, I didn't really look at it like I have a trauma story and I haven't really figured out what that is or how to start to heal that. I need to find a different modality because sometimes when you know things, I have a lot of shame about like, if I know so much, why haven't I been able to apply it to myself? And B, sometimes when you know some stuff, if your body's not really feeling safe enough to deal with it, you're gonna I think I'm sneakily, not intentionally, but really working a way around all of these things. So that even if I did present with my counselors and my supervisors, I didn't present it in a way that was like, okay, I really need to work here because I'm sure my body that it's been doing were protecting itself. So your body always protects yourself. So that's the thing with the sympathetic nervous system. Emotionally, mentally, physically, your whole body is always just trying to keep you alive. So your body does things in order to do that, which I'm very grateful for. But now I really need to connect those dots and let the embarrassment just be a part of the story, not the stopping me from looking deeper. And, that embarrassment is like, how can I help other people heal their trauma, but not heal myself? And I do know the answer is that healing happens with others. So even when I was a counselor and a psychotherapist, and even with coaching with anything, really, it's not so much the modality that you use. They've done studies about so what's the most effective modality to use in therapy, just in general. And it's never like Freudian's better, CBT's better, this and that. There's things that the insurance company will pay for, but it doesn't mean that the modalities are better one than the other. It's the practitioner and it's the relationship with the person seeking help and the person being the helper, quote unquote. It's that relationship that's the transference and the countertransference within that actually does the healing more so than the modality. So if you're out there with an invisible illness, with chronic fatigue, with any of these things, the tendency is to not want to be a burden, so you do more. And there's also a tendency to then, with that, not talk about it, feel like you don't feel that you don't fit into the medical system. You haven't been getting accurate diagnosis. You have been brushed off. So you talk less about that because of the shame or with people well-intentioned to try to give you tips on it that maybe you haven't thought of. But I'm sure if you have gone through this, you've ran the whole gamut, really. There's probably nothing that you haven't tried. So that also makes you want to pull back because you haven't found medical professionals or professionals to really help you. So that's another thing where you pull in. And I know I have through the years, not only because I thought I should know how to do this, but then also when I did reach out for help in the medical field, I was always kind of brushed off that it was something else. So let's break down, I'm sure you've heard it by now, trauma and trauma recovery and trauma help is trauma informed. It's like trauma, 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 right? And we all have a series of things. No one goes through their childhood unscathed. It's not a thing, even with the best parents. We all have things that have given us a way where we feel we need to have behaviors and emotions unconsciously to defend ourselves and to keep ourselves alive. And what this does is lives in your tissues. So let's break this down. The connective tissue is the scaffolding of the body. There are tendons, ligaments, cartilage, fat, and fascia. And if you have lipedema, a hypermobility issue, the whole spectrum from just being hypermobile to hypermobile syndrome disorder or spectrum disorder or EDS. And even with MCAS, that has a lot to do with your connective tissue disorders. Also, POTS is in there as well. And you can argue because of those things, also because they're all related, that chronic fatigue is in that same category. It's not always a direct connective tissue disorder, but most of these people have some of those things as well. So there is a loose connection. So there you go with all of that scaffolding. So we have some, even if you don't have any emotional or any other things going on, the fact that your body is always trying to figure out how to work with connective tissue that isn't normative, as they call it. So it doesn't respond. So already your body's kind of starting to fight and do some extra things to help yourself out just by breathing, moving, going to the bathroom, etc. And so fascia, it's a continuous web of connective tissue that wraps around every muscle, bone, nerve, and organ. This was once dismissed as just packing material. We now know that fascia is alive. It has nerves, blood flow, and even immune cells. So both of those things together. And if you have any of these illnesses, these two are main components in trauma and healing. And they're also the things that are not the best. They're not normative. They behave differently than other bodies that don't have connective tissue disorders. So when trauma happens and doesn't get discharged, fascia reacts. It tightens, hardens, knots up. And that restriction can last for years and even decades. And because fascia is full of atomic nerve fibers, the same nerve fibers that govern fight or flight, a tight fascia keeps telling your brain you're not safe. And when we're not safe, our body responds in kind to get our sympathetic nervous system up and ready and geared. That's mast cells on board. Those are immunity. So everything, so your whole body, unbeknownst to you, has been kind of waging this war and this fight when maybe it's just something simple as like you've overstretched your tendon and that led to a flare, which led to your body saying, hey, we don't feel safe. So the body really needs to feel safe for any sort of trauma work, to any sort of anything to really happen. Actually, we think we can force our way through, but all that really does is create more defenses in a way or behaviors. And they're not negative. They're just your body wants to survive. So when it feels unsafe, it's going to do whatever it needs to feel safe. And tight fascia, again, keeps telling your brain you're not safe. That's why trauma survivors also feel stiff, braced, or in chronic pain. So in general, with trauma, you don't have to have these specific things. They don't know exactly. I mean, there's more research done in EDS and even POTS. There's more information coming out of mast cell. There's limited research. There's more anecdotal, but like major research that needs to happen with lipedema isn't really there. And same with chronic fatigue. So they all seem that there's a genetic predisposition. So even if you have EDS, then you have to have a genetic testing. So maybe you don't have full-blown EDS, but there's 13 subcategories. And then there's also a spectrum disorder, and there's also hypermobility. So if you have any of these, you have some sort of collagen issue. And so you have some sort of connective tissue issue. So you have some sort of fascia issue, right? So on some scale, whether it's 100 or 2, your body is dealing with this unbeknownst to you just by being alive. So when this tissue itself is signaling danger, and fascia just doesn't wrap muscles, it wraps your organs. That's called visceral fascia. So when trauma or stress chokes that fascia, you get gut pain, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. You can also get things, in my case, where I have a central lymphatic issue. So of all the things I've done and clearing all the lymphs and doing all this work, I technically should feel amazing now. There should be progress. Where in my case, still have had issues with my belly being swollen. So things are not moving as they should. So really get Leslyn Keith's book on the lymphatic system, and I'll link it down below if you want to know more about it. And follow or take courses with Dr. Perry Nicholson or Nickerson. I always mess up his name, but I'll leave a link below. He's Stopped Chasing Pain. In his courses, he goes deeper into this. But basically, all of these things that I have look like this. The gut pain and the bloating and the flaring are from MCAS and the lipedema inflammation and my central lymphatics not working and being clogged in my chest. Also constipation, which I have for years, which adds to the bloating, and that's a dysautonomia from the chronic fatigue and POTS and hypermobility, and that slows your gut's mobility. Also, if you have any pelvic function disorders, so then that also is a prolapse either in your colon and or your, like if you're a woman, in your uterine area. So in as men, they could still have a prolapse. So there's all of that as well going on. And so mine is chronic. Obviously, I'm in my 50s, 54. So I've had these for decades. So it's not just brand new. So if you're younger and listening to this, hopefully this is like any of these symptoms click and be like, okay, I'm going to start figuring out what this is, trying to get diagnosis and help right away. So you don't have to suffer decades, or it goes so long, then you have more complications just because the sheer amount of time. And the heavy, sluggish exhaustion that comes from not just from illness and having these viruses, but also my fascia screaming, again, we're not safe. So I talk about this a lot when I do one-on-one work, and I have even in relationships and forever. So that's kind of always like safety first, really, is a thing I teach. Now I just have to figure out how it looks in my body. So when people say trauma is just in your head, or, like now people have used their trauma, unfortunately, to kind of get other people how to respond to them. But your trauma is your own, no matter how it comes to being, whether it is something really horrific like abuse, or if it's something that's distressed. Once it's in your body, it is your responsibility to take care of solely. And I have seen it time and time again with my patients or clients that feeling safe and healing, it changes their demeanor, their outlook, and actually makes your system feel more alive. So when they say it's in your head, and really when they say this about your illness specifically, no. Your illness is also in your fascia, and trauma is in your fascia. And because we have illnesses that correlate directly to connective tissue and fascia, there is some trauma in there. That doesn't mean that trauma is like bad, or like, it just means that, okay, there's, again, safety. It is in your connective tissue. It's in your gut, your joints, your nervous system, your immune system. And here's the really hopeful part of all this, that just as trauma rewrites pain, healing can rewrite safety. So both things can happen. So because it's so in there, it's not that this is a life sentence. There's many things you can do in order to rewrite your pain and actually rewrite your story so you feel safe, and then your healing can begin. That doesn't mean that I don't think it's going to take everything away. You have a connective tissue, like your body has connective tissue issues, right? So you're always going to have to live with them, but you can substantially reduce your symptomology and increase your well-being. And the joy that life is supposed to have, you can start to have that when you also address this part of it. And sometimes just even knowing that that's part of the response, kind of trauma is built into it. So we're going to talk later on in the next few episodes about this, but just really kind of getting that understanding is just from the jump, your body has had to create extra precautions in order to be safe. So let's get into, I kind of went through my story and also into the educational component of this at the same time. So let's get into busting some myths, okay? So let's bust this myth that healing happens alone. No. Healing doesn't happen in isolations. Us humans are wired for relationship. We need witnesses, mirrors, and safe others to really kind of be like, okay, do I feel safe? Oh, yeah. I'm in the situation and there's no danger. My system knows and is retraining itself that this is safe. So even with everything we do, it's retraining to find safety. And yet, when you live with chronic illness, it's very easy to isolate. You do cancel plans because you have to, and you need to because you need rest. You don't feel good, and you don't want to explain yourself to people again, especially if people don't understand. And most people don't. They don't really understand tired, and they don't understand pain, and especially if you don't look like you're in pain, they don't understand that. So there's so many things that they don't understand with this, so it does get exhausting. So you do usually have walls of defensiveness that get higher and higher until it just feels safer to be alone. But isolation isn't a cure. You do need to rest, but there is this component where you definitely need someone, community, even just listening, hopefully, to this podcast. And that's why I'm doing it, that you're really not alone. Everything that you're doing is valid. And that can just be like, okay, just knowing this information sometimes can make your whole system feel like, okay, I'm not in the outskirts of this is just me and all these things that are happening to me just are making me feel crazy. But it's really, you're in the outskirts, but there's a ton of other women that are going through the same thing. We just need to create a system where you can get into, where you can be seen and heard and given valid treatment options so your system feels even safer. And just like trauma rewrites pain, it also is the opposite. When you feel safe, embodied, and in a compassionate relationship, really with yourself, you can rewrite your story for safety. So let's end with a feel-good flow today. That's just a simple fascial release together. So it's very easy. You just want to start in a comfortable position and roll your shoulders slowly back 3 times, then forward 3 times. Then shake your arms gently like you're shaking off water and let your wrists and fingers flop. Close your eyes if you can. Take a slow inhale, and as you exhale, imagine your fascia, that connective web, softening like fabric being smoothed. And whisper to yourself, I am safe, I belong. And even if you get this mantra of I am safe and I belong, just think about it throughout the day. That is very powerful as well, to keep telling your system when you are in a safe place that you are safe. So here's the takeaway from part 1. Trauma doesn't just live in the memories, it lives in your tissues, in the fascia, in the connective tissue, in the gut, and the way we brace ourselves and also have pain or experience aching. And once you're aware of that, everything can change as far as at least like, okay, this is why these things are happening. And then you can do some internal work to see what you need to do to feel safe. Because if trauma can be stored, it can also be released. And in part 2, we're going to go deeper into the nervous system, how trauma rewires fight or flight, why your pain dial might be stuck on high. And if today's episode resonated, share it with a friend who's been told their pain is all in their head. And don't forget to follow me at the Donna Piper for more ways to move, heal, and belong in your body. Until next time, remember, you're not broken. You're not lazy. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body has just been carrying stories, and these stories can be rewritten. If this episode made you feel even more seen, brought you clarity, or reminded you that you're not alone, please take a moment to rate, review, and send it to someone who needs that same reminder. You can find more tools, blog posts, and support over at donnapiper.com. And hey, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Got a question for me? Every month I do a listener coaching episode, and I'd love to hear from you. Send your questions, stories, or flare-up confessions to Donna@donnapiper.com. And you just might hear your answer on the show. Until next time, dear body, I'm listening, and I am so glad that you are here.